Hello and welcome to Solomoriah Speaks, episode 14, the old school campaign. I commented last week in episode 13 some questions. I commented last week that I don't prep for campaigns. I laughed about that. I don't prep for campaigns. I don't plan for campaigns at all. And that's true. But I laughed about it, and I really didn't explain much about what I was talking about. So I'm going to try to explain it now. And I'm going to start by talking about the New School campaign. And when I say New School, you need to understand that these kind of campaigns started being created back in the 80s. So it's not that new. It's really kind of the way a lot of people think the game is supposed to work. The idea is the game master has a plot. Either he or she has created it themselves or it is presented in some game supplement. There is a villain, possibly, very likely a BBEG, big bad evil guy, or maybe it's a girl, maybe it's a dragon, I don't know, who is ahead of all the problems. The evil emperor is a very traditional version of this. The evil emperor must be overthrown, not the rightful ruler of the kingdoms and so forth, whatever. The important part is that there's this idea of this end game that the players are going to reach. And so in service of this end game are all this series of adventures that come before that are meant to lead the players through. And I say these things have existed for a long time. The Desert of Desolation series, which predates the Dragonlance works, but is by the same Hickman and Weiss. I hope I pronounced that right. The same people who created Dragonlance later is one of these. The last adventure in that series, The Lost Tomb of Martek, is so literally a railroad. The player characters cannot go backwards. Once they enter a certain point of the adventure, they cannot back out. They must go through every step of the adventure in a linear fashion from start to finish once they reach a certain point. And in my opinion, I wouldn't even call it a railroad. It's not always completely obvious what the players need to do to advance, and sometimes the game master has to take a bit of a hand. I don't remember the details that well. It's been a long time since I ran Lost Tomb of Martek. I actually loved aspects of it. I'm not going to say it wasn't good. I am going to say that it's very forceful about making the players go a certain way. But that's the New School campaign. That is the whole story campaign idea. Now, if you were directing a movie or TV show, and you had a number of actors who were working on this show, and you were to direct them in their various scenes, that would be analogous to what we're talking about here. Those actors, if they're any good at all, show up on the stage having read the script, at least the parts they're responsible for, understanding the words they're expected to say, the actions they're expected to take, possibly the motivations of the characters, how they're feeling and why they're doing the things they're doing. To play the characters well, the actors have to know all of these things. So they need to have read the script. And of course, you as the director also need to have read the script. You all need to understand what it is you're creating here to create that. Player characters come to your table, whether it's a real table or a virtual tabletop. They come to your table to play a game. They are playing characters they have created. They know their motivations, and they know, maybe they couldn't put the motivations into words, but they know what their characters are going to do. They're playing the character they want to play. Some are what they used to call vicarious participators. Some are seriously trying to portray the role, trying to get into the role, trying to imagine being the elf wizard or whatever it is that they've decided to play. And then there's the Munchkin players that show up with characters that have been combat optimized to the limits and are designed to be the most effective they can possibly be in a fight scene. Even those players, even the Munchkins, are playing the characters they want to play. They understand the motivations of their characters. They understand what it is they want to do what it is they will do in a various situation. Even if all they want to do is kick in the door, kill the monster, take the treasure, that's still a motivation. That's still their decision. The only excuse you have is that you let them at your table. If you really don't want them playing that way and that's what they want to do, you have to come to a parting of the ways. I don't run those people off. They can be rehabilitated. I firmly believe that. But the point is these players came to the table. They know their characters' motivations, and you don't. You don't. Because you haven't read their scripts. They may not have even written scripts. Some people like to do that. But an awful lot of people, they just come with an idea in their head and a character created, and that's their character. This is what they imagine themselves being, or for the purpose of the adventure, what they want to imagine themselves being. And they haven't read your script. They don't know about the BBEG at the end. It wouldn't be much of an adventure if they knew where they were going. But because they don't know their lines, as it were, they don't know what you expect of them, and you don't know what they want, what their characters want, what their characters are going to do, you can't run this like a movie. You can't expect the story to go where you expect it to go. And I see game masters frequently complaining that they can't get their player characters to do the things they need to do. They haven't read the script, and they're not supposed to. You can't, in my opinion. You normally can't run an adventure that way. Now, if you are running adventures that way, and it works for you and it works for your players, I am not telling you that you're doing anything wrong. If y'all are having a good time, if all your players are having a good time, and you're having a good time, then whatever you're doing must be right. But for the rest of us, when you don't know what's going to happen, even if you know the players, you may not know what kind of characters they're going for. Your players grow and change. Or maybe they just read an interesting book or saw an interesting TV show and thought, that's a cool character concept. I bet I could do that. That'd be fun to play. You don't know what they're doing. And they sure as heck don't know what's going on in your story. The best thing you can do is not have a story. Don't know any of this stuff over here. That's too far off in the future. Start out like I do. We have adventure modules. We have them. You can get them other places. You can run vintage adventures. They work great. Many other OSR games have adventures that'll work with Basic Fantasy or Iron Falcon just fine with a little or maybe no changes. Even modern adventures can be adapted, although it's quite a bit more work because the differences in assumptions and so forth, everything's just different. But even so, if you want whatever you want to do, start out with basic adventures, not basic in the sense of levels necessarily, but basic in the sense that they have simple motivations and simple hooks. The best choices are adventures like Morgan's Fort or JN1, The Chaotic Caves, or others like that instead of having a linear story going through them, they have multiple hooks that can lead in different directions. Throw all the hooks out, or throw some of the hooks out, and see what your player characters cabbage onto. See what they grab. See what grabs them. See what catches their attention. Let them play these adventures out however they want to. And after a few sessions, maybe after several sessions, I've seen it take upwards of a year of play, you may begin to see patterns in their behavior and patterns in their actions. You may see that they become fixated on NPCs you hadn't even thought much about or whatever. They may themselves create the storylines. Always listen to your players, because sometimes they come up with really good ideas and don't even know it. Always pay attention to them. Always pay attention to what they say and what they don't say. But that's important. At that point, you can kind of see what might motivate them. You can start writing adventures or choosing adventures that work well with their particular motivations, or maybe take existing adventures and alter them in ways that will fit with these characters' motivations, that will make them want to play those adventures and will make them want to jump in. Do that. Follow your player's lead. I know that is completely backwards to what everybody wants you to think you're supposed to do. But there's many of them and just one of you. Follow your player's leads. Let them guide you towards the adventures that you should then prep, either create or adapt or simply just run out of the box if they work. Let them guide you that way. And if a BBEG type character or some other type of opponent or enemy rises up organically this way, go with it. And when they defeat that one, always remember that the villain may have a boss. Or, if not a boss, a rival who can now move forward because the rival's enemy has been defeated by your player characters. Maybe they held each other in check. I actually have a story that I wrote that is that very thing. Characters in the story defeat an alien wizard, only to discover that it was that alien wizard's rivalry with another alien wizard that kept the second alien wizard from causing trouble. They played them off. The two had been played off against each other, and the players, by defeating an evil villain, enabled another evil villain to move against them. That works fantastic in an adventure series. You just have to have villains that would naturally not get along, and that's really not that hard. That's one of the strengths of basic fantasy, in that it does not have an alignment system. It's really easy for you to create ambiguous characters. You can create a character, a wizard or a king or a duke or some other noble or a warlord who is maybe evil in your mind, but the players don't know that. All they know is that this character is an ally against some other evil that they're fighting. And they make an alliance with this, let's say, warlord, and the warlord brings his troops, and they go to attack the evil sorcerer's tower and defeat the evil sorcerer, and yay, all the poor people that were under the thumb of the sorcerer are now free, and so forth, and the characters are heroes, and everybody's happy, and the warlord now goes back with whatever booty he got as his share of defeating the sorcerer, plus a bunch of more seasoned troops. Whoever survived the fight in the first place is now tougher, takes the ball back to where he came from, and the next part of the campaign involves this warlord causing problems and the players having to fight them. Great part about doing it this way too, it's often difficult in an adventure campaign to make the big bad evil guy anything more than a caricature, anything more than a stereotype or a silhouette of sorts. This is what the shape of the villain is, and so this character must fill this shape. That's all we know about them. It's difficult for them to become characters that the players recognize and know, because they rarely get to talk to them. I have had BBEGs who never got to exchange two sentences with the player characters before being killed, because the players decided, well, the bad guy's done all these awful things, we just need to kill him, and they literally plow through his defenses and kill him without ever talking to him. Sometimes you might have to contrive an unlikely situation just to make a meeting like that happen. But if they're allied with a character who then turns out to be a bad guy later, they've had time to meet that character and get to know them. I was considering, when I made this video, telling a lot of story about my players in my in-person group, and some of the stuff that they've gotten into. I touched on that in a previous video also. And in fact, I tried to do it, and the video got really long and didn't make a lot of sense. Probably would have been insanely boring to anyone who was listening to it. But I'll tell you a short piece. Spoiler alert. If you might play in Tomb of Karsma-Megalos and have not, it might be going to be playing in Tomb of Karsma-Megalos, you should not listen to the remainder of this video, because I'm going to give away spoilers for that adventure. Okay, you were warned. My players in my in-person group were the original playtesters for Tomb of Karsma-Megalos many years ago when I first wrote it. They dealt with the various canned opponents in that dungeon, in that adventure, and they found the stone figure of Karsma-Megalos sitting on his throne at the very end. And they figured out how to use the Medusa amulet to turn him back into flesh. All of this. Now, Karsma-Megalos as the hereditary leader of the Saren people, although he's not forgotten, but no one living has ever met him because he's been stoned for so long. But in that position, he wasn't necessarily an enemy to the player characters. None of the player characters were actually Saren, but still, he wasn't an enemy to the player characters. That he looks upon them in a friendly fashion. But the ancestral lands of the Saren High Plains, are within the territory of the country now known as Eneron, a country founded by driving out the Saren, or subjugating those who were not driven out immediately, and founding a new country by the General Oberon of Roslane, who then made himself a king. It's a long story. It's all historical to my campaign. It's all backstory. None of it actually happened in play, so I'm not going to bore you with the story. But the important fact is that only a relatively small country has a significant, in fact, it's almost entirely a Saren population, and they neighbor on Eneron. And subsequent to my players doing this and returning home, Karsma starting off simply the weight of his name, but then using his power to know his enemies' plans for the next day, his enemies' actual actions for the next day, every day when he wakes up, allowed him to quickly wipe out opposition and build up an army around him until the army of the country actually forsook their previous king and swore their allegiance to the invincible warlord, Karsma, who is now recognized as the rightful and true king of Darimpi. And the first act of the rightful and true king of Darimpi, Karsma, is to look across the lower Daya River towards the country of Eneron, where my player characters came from, where his ancestral lands are. And he will become a problem for them. We are actually very close to the point where he could become a substantial problem for them. He still likes them. They rescued him after all. He owes them something, but he believes, an awful lot more to his people, and he owes retribution to the descendants of the first Eneronians, of the King Oberon himself, and the people he brought with him. So it's inevitable that there's going to be some kind of conflict. It's inevitable that there's going to be some kind of a battle. And remember, there's a reason why Karsma is considered invincible. They started out helping someone in need. They had no idea what they were doing, no idea of the political effect that they would have, of the destabilizing effect they would have on their own region and the threat to their own country that they were about to cause. But that's exactly what happened. In fact, much of this player group's early adventures served in one way or the other to destabilize substantial parts of the campaign world. It's a very long and potentially very boring story. The important thing is that it's not boring to those players. They remember all of this stuff. They remember it better than I do, which is a little troublesome sometimes. One player has kept a list of the name of, I think, every NPC he's ever met, where he met them, and what he thought of them. If they were potentially useful to him, what they might be useful for. It's amazing. The stories that grow out of what your players choose to do, out of what the player characters succeed in doing or fail at doing. Those are the stories that are going to matter to your players. Those are the stories that they're going to care about, that they're going to remember. If nobody else ever does, and probably no one else will ever care, but they will remember them and they mean something to them. If you drag them down a railroad where there are, I imagine actually less of a railroad and more of a boat trip through the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland, where there are various set pieces of different scenes, and the players riding the boat are participating perhaps in the scenes, but they have no control over the order that they happen in. Where is the story there that they're going to remember? The stories they're going to remember in a campaign like that are the ones where they broke your game. Those are the ones they're going to remember, and it's going to drive you nuts. You are, I'm going to end this on this thought, you are, as the game master, not the enemy of your players. Although you might be the enemy of the player characters. And there's a distinction there that's significant. It is your job to provide them with challenges. It is not your job to decide which challenges they take on or how they take them on. It is not even your place to decide whether they succeed or fail at those things. It's up to the players to choose what their characters are going to attempt and to accept the consequences or to reap the benefits. You are the ally of your players. Even at the moments that you are the greatest enemy to the player characters, you have to balance that. You have to remember that that is your purpose, to make sure everyone's having a good time. A lot of people say that a game master's place is to be neutral. Neutral is where you should start. You should start at neutral. If that's all the further you get, that may be enough. That may be enough. Your players can make something out of what you give them as long as you're neutral. But if you're their ally, if you see that something that's happening is potentially cool, and you grease the wheels a little bit to make it easier for the thing to happen, for the thing to go right, everyone's going to appreciate the results. But you still, having made it happen, having made the scene start, it is not your place to decide how the scene ends. Just remember that. Just remember that. Your job as a game master is to make sure everyone's having a good time. And if you do it in some completely different way than what I just described, but your players are all having a good time, you're still doing the right thing. You're still doing the right thing. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. I'm just trying to put this out there for people to understand that there is more than one way to do it. And oftentimes the easiest way to do it is to have the lightest hand on the wheel. So I guess that's the thought I'm going to end on. Thanks for listening. Little bonus content here at the end. Talk to you later. And now for something completely different. I have been working on some figures that I'm planning on using for convention games, if we ever have them again. I have mentioned this on the forum, but I haven't shared any pictures of them yet. This will be the first. I have figures for all 8 of the standard characters from the Morgan Sport module, BF1. I use versions of those characters at different levels of experience for any convention appearance. And up until recently, I have been using penny tokens, which I've also shared on the forum. But now that I have a 3D printer, I decided I wanted to actually have figures for them. So I created these figures. Well, okay, I'm lying to you. All of these figures are other people's designs, taken off the Thingiverse. All of them are under a Creative Commons license that allows me to share them for free. Most of them are under a Creative Commons attribution license that would allow me to sell them if I wanted to, but as usual with the Basic Fantasy Project, I have no urge whatsoever to sell them. Darien, Morningstar, Apoculus, Barthol. Over here I have Bork, Thoris, Lucas, and Aura. So all 8 of those initial characters that are standard. They have my 2-cent base, as I call it. The base, which accepts with a little force applied, 1 or 2 pennies for weight, that will allow you to have plastic 3D printed miniature figures that don't fall over on a moment's notice. I will be sharing some, you will have already seen some close-ups of these. I'll put them through the video. There's one other guy, and I'll show you a close-up of this one. This is for my Iron Falcon game. I have brutally hacked together from pieces of 2 different figures a version of the pig-faced orc that is a standard for the Iron Falcon game. It is very vintage, very old school. I will have a link to the place where I share this. It is a terrible figure in terms of how I hacked it together, but printed out small, it's fine. All of these figures are printed roughly to a 30 millimeter scale. They're a little smaller than a lot of modern figures, but bigger than the old ones. So they're big enough anyway. They all have 22 millimeter round bases, the same 2-cent base on all of them. So I'll have the Basic Fantasy pre-gen characters, Basic Fantasy, the 4 of the intro story, the 4 iconic characters, plus the 4 extras that are all in Morgan's Fort together. And I will have the Big-Faced Orc all available on the forum and linked from the description below. So if you're interested in any of these, if you have a 3D printer, I strongly recommend Cura with tree supports for printing them. I printed all of them standing upright except for the orc, who I tried printing tilted over on his back. I did not get completely satisfactory results with the base on that figure. In fact, I printed it twice to get one good enough to use. So I'm not exactly sure if I'm doing something wrong, but if you're more experienced with 3D printing than I am, you probably won't have a problem with it. If you're less experienced with 3D printing than I am, take my advice. Use Cura, Ultimaker Cura, regardless of what your 3D printer is, it should work. Use tree supports. All of these were done at 75% infill. None of them takes much more than an hour to print. Most of them take less than an hour to print. So they're fine for the purpose. The detail isn't fantastic. I have an Ender 5 Plus, which can print large things, but it's not great at fine detail. The nozzle could be smaller, but I'm not going to change it. Not for the moment anyway. I'm perfectly happy with what I've got. They are absolutely 100% usable. I may have scaled Barthel a little big. I'm going to leave him like he is for the moment anyway. But these are the characters. I'm going to have these figures linked in the description below on my Thingiverse account and linked on the forum. So all those places. And I guess that's all I've got to say about that. They are all going to be free, just like they were in the first place. Just like everything for the Basic Fantasy Project, I'm a big believer in sharing. And I'm going to share these with you. They were shared with me. I will share them with you. So that's it for this. Let's call this Solo's Crafting Corner. That's it for this segment. Talk to you later.